Hello, and this is Adam and the Opportunity Community presenting Political Brainstorming, a place where we act as the voice of the people to hear different perspectives to help establish our own opinions, where rather than creating division, we foster innovation, hoping to solve modern problems with creative solutions.
Alrighty, so
I'm going to be the host of Political Brainstorming. My name is Adam. Hi. This is cast 1, hopefully of very many episodes, but we will see what happens. All of our operations are going to be kind of makeshift today, and that is okay, because we do not believe in flashiness. We believe more in the content of what we create. So, without further ado, I am going to start now referring to Alfonso, who is my guest today. He will be starting us off. Go ahead.
alrighty, Adam. Well, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to dive right into it. So, you have $100 million plan. That's right.
We do.
And what exactly is that $100 million plan? If you could elaborate on it for us.
Well, $100 million plan is essentially trying to
advocate that our leaders have done an inadequate job of delivering necessary infrastructure to develop Canadian success. $100 million is about
0.1% of our entire spending budget for a year. And the $100 million is saying, with this $100 million, we could make Canada this much better, and with basically minimal investment. So, first thing I'm going to get into is the most important piece of the $100 million plan, incorporating a homeschool post-secondary system. Now, a homeschool post-secondary system is going to mean education is going to be free for 100% of the population, where they can go online and get, with a combination of artificial intelligence and teachers that are colluding with the government to create efficient and affordable services to give back to us, we then take that and can produce it to the people for about $50 million. It should not cost a cent more than that. Now, the things that this is going to do is it's going to present a whole bunch of opportunity to people that do not have the assets to go to school. People that they choose not to go to school because of debt. And debt is one of the main reasons why this has to happen. Because debt in of itself is one of the leading drivers in inflation. And schooling debt is often forgiven by the government.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the highest forgiven debts there is in our country anyway, in Canada. But all of this debt that piles up and then is owed to these schools is accumulating, and it's costing our government more and more to then have to essentially absorb the debt because it's not getting paid back. And remember, banks don't give any debt out. They're lending government money to people that the governments or the banks issue but don't have any of it. So the real people that are suffering are the government.
Okay. So you said that you wanted to create an AI and help with post-secondary schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so you also said, well, this leads me into another question. You want to implement paid-for online schooling, right?
Online schooling needs to be free. Now, online schooling being free is essential to Canada getting where it needs to go, because there's too much things oppressing people that do not have the resources to advance themselves.
Mm.
And the fact that the government doesn't supply the adequate resources to push forward means they're not really doing a good enough job at fostering their own people to generate success.
Okay, so that leads me into the next question. The existing schools that we have, our existing post-secondary schools, how do we then improve them to increase with success, where people who are students can contribute towards companies and
Right. So the existing schools will have major losses because there's going to be tons of people that aren't going to school, aren't going to post-secondary because it's a homeschool option. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be an option. Doesn't mean that the post-secondaries aren't going to reduce their prices, because a lot of the time they're not.
What they are going to do is take on more foreign students
To subsidize their income. But slight regulation needs to pass that the people that are coming in to learn have to be willing to act as consultants for our existing businesses. Now that is going to replace a very, very large spread of our deficit in school in the post-secondary system. So the post-secondary system is going to get hit with tons of less people going into school. But with the bringing in of extra immigrants, we are going to offer something that we call guilds. Now, guilds is again about a $30 to $40 million program that we want to institute into Canada that is devised to create opportunity and job creation by allowing schools to consult for any company in Canada. So all business will have their own business consultants that are then getting education and will all have oversight by people that are working in these schools who are providing consulting services to the masses, to every business in Canada, so that we can use innovative solutions that these schools are then going to be fostering. They're going to need to change the curriculum slightly so that they're more application-based.
okay, so I take it that this would allow current students to gain experience and work towards their degree, while also helping out the companies to gain financial services. So it's a mutual benefit for both of them.
Yes.
If I'm correct.
So what we're planning on having guilds do, like I said, about $30 million. What we're planning on having this $30 million company do is
Take your
you
time.
have to create a platform that is derived as a third-party business consulting firm. So we then have all of businesses have access to guilds for free. Now, what guilds does is it's going to be able to ask you what your solutions are. It's going to be able to have all of your accounting be able to be done on guilds so that we can identify problems if you have certain spending issues that are not common in your industry. You can be able to circulate them and say, hey, this is why you're not finding success. You're spending too much money on thus and thus. A lot of the success that is done is going to be driven. When you find something that works, you have to build on it, right? When you find a successful method, there should be nobody doing a non-successful method, right? Every time you find some way of producing something cheaper, everybody should be looking at producing it that way. Because if one company has a patent on a way of producing it cheaper and nobody is allowed access to that technology, the innovation levels of how to then make that cheaper again are going to come significantly down. So what's so important about guilds is that we're going to be able to have access to tons of information, and we're going to be able to study it at our schools and have it as accessible information for our schools so that they can apply all the information they have to then to grow businesses within Canada. They will then create their own business consulting and act as consultants for businesses and get paid as businesses require the services of guilds to figure out problems within our small business.
One other thing I want to ask you about is you told me that you want more accountability in Canada. How would we achieve more accountability in Canada, and who is it that you want to be more accountable?
So accountability is such an easy question. The thing about our governments is that they do things at the beginning, like they get in and then they're like, we can do all this stuff because we're in here for 4 years. And it's wonderful. Like right away after they won the election, Trudeau goes on that nice luxurious vacation because he knows that in 4 years' time, nobody's going to remember what he's done. Right? So in terms of increasing accountability, it can all be achieved very, very easily if we wanted to spend the adequate money into fixing the problem. But the voice of the people is not pushing to fix the problem.
Right.
Because we're standing here complaining about the current government and then not pushing for creative solutions to come up with answers. We're standing here looking to try and push the government to have more success. Like, they have so many good plans that are just executed poorly, that lead to the demise, and they're executed poorly because the liberals put in the plan and the conservatives want to wreck it, and then the conservatives put in the plan and the liberals want to wreck it. Because what they do is they want to embarrass each other. They have no real desire to make their desire to get in power is superseding their desire to make the country better. I strongly believe there's a lot of strong parties in Canada if we could just have them all in smaller doses. So, for that to happen, I do have a plan of increasing CRA, the budget toward increasing security to our CRA accounts that already exist, by about $20 million. Now, I get these numbers off of my tech consultant who designs apps for a living.
They're not infirm just yet. These
Yes.
numbers can still change. So.
Of course. Now, remember, guys, that this political brainstorming, what we're all about is having ideas, being taken down, and then being rebuilt. We're not about being 100% right all the time. It is about having the courage to stick to an opinion, listen to somebody else's opinion, and understand and empathize with the opinion, and be able to understand what you're giving up to believe what you're believing. Every time we hear another perspective, we're growing. We're growing who we are. We're growing all the things that make us believe what we believe are now being, the circle of all the perspectives is widening, and it grows our perspective on how we can approach politics. What my plan is to improve accountability. It's rather simple, and I talked about CRA increasing its budgets to security. And the reason I want to do that is to implement online voting. Online voting. So let's talk about the benefits of that quick. You have online voting. The benefits, we all know that voting costs millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. And it's constant. It's a constant cost to people. And it's pretty much absolutely obsolete at this point. Like, in terms of, like, the United States, where they feel their democratic system is falling apart, online voting and having a board of both people overseeing online votes might actually fix the democratic system and restore faith in it, because it's untouchable. You cannot manipulate it.
Yes.
You understand where I'm coming from. I appreciate you. But the whole point of having online voting isn't just to save the money that it would then cost to run these votes. By the way, my online voting platform is a part of increasing the CRA. That's why we moved the CRA up. Okay? The CRA security goes up. We spend about $20 million to increase CRA security for everybody. And then we can implement voting based on our CRA account. Something that already exists, using our existing infrastructure to then build off of it. Now, why online voting is so essential is because it now empowers us to be able to have more common votes. Right? We can now vote, say, every 6 months. Where accountability, you want to take a vacation as soon as you're elected? Well, we're going to remember it by the time the next election comes. Right? We don't agree with the way that Canada is moving. We don't have to sit around for 3 years while we're all miserable watching a specific party not do a good job. All right? But it also comes down to all of the things that I mentioned earlier, like we need to start fostering independence to start showing up in Canada. Like I said, Canadian politics has good parties. but it doesn't have the best parties. And it's because of an oppressive system that doesn't really let parties develop. It's because the system isn't designed to have people come in and make a difference. It's designed to only make a difference through the general masses that these two parties, or three parties in our case, have sort of pushed through. If you're American, our three parties are NDP, conservatives, and liberals. Plus the bloc, which is a whole nother fun conversation. But in terms of like how our political politics works, is usually the conservatives and the bloc just get together and they do their own thing. And then the NDP and the liberals, the NDP holds the liberals hostage. The liberals just like to spend money on green initiatives and doing things that are progressive and are a great luxury for the planet, and it would be great to not burn to death when we step outside, but how about being able to eat first and then we'll worry about it, right? But it comes down to what you want to trade off and what you don't, right? Liberals, I see them going so far in the direction of they care more about the environment than they do about economics. Not about their people, because they care very deeply for their people. But the economic side of it is they're not looking at the future of how it's going to affect our great-grandchildren. How their spending is going to have these giant implications on our great-grandchildren. And another thing I'm going to get into about liberals is that they are very strong in immigration. Now, immigration in of itself is a very good thing if utilized correctly. When utilized correctly, we can create artificial shortages in specific industries that are usually lower paying jobs. And what that can do is put pressure on companies to be more innovative or pay their people more. Because every time a job posting sits open, it's not being filled, that company is losing money, because obviously they're not going to hire somebody unless they were going to make money off of that person.
Right.
So the idea is to say, we do not want any immigrants in minimum wage jobs. We want them filling holes that exist today in jobs that we pay adequately but have a hard time filling. Things like nurses, and there's many others that I'm not going to go into at this particular moment, but you understand the gist of what I'm trying to say. Immigration in of itself can also be a very massive part on how we push tourism forward. I believe that eventually post-secondary systems are going to be able to own their own residents, own their own food production to feed everybody who comes in, and then we just use the people that come here to develop our business. Right? That's the idea. And every time a school is able to help and consult another business, they're getting kickbacks again. Tuition might come down a little bit because we're actually getting more value out of the students that come here. Afterwards, when they do decide to leave, they can use guilds to then direct people directly into jobs that may not have even existed before they touched guilds. Guilds can create jobs in certain businesses and use their students to then take off in a certain direction. Say you're working and you're an oil rig and you find that this student has created tech that is going to be able to allow you to get oil that you weren't able to get at before. Well, now what they can do is set up a system where they can bridge students into that industry and say, we're developing this department under this tech business so that it'll push them forward. Where we can say as a government, okay, well, we have no tech companies. Like very, very minimal tech companies, right? And something like Google or Apple that provide quite a lot of revenue to business, to everybody, because they're just so globally large that lots of companies invest in it, and it provides a service to all of Canada or all of the world. Have a Google phone or an Apple phone, right? There's two of some of the largest companies there is, because they provide a service to everyone. Now, Canada's spread into that is so tiny. We do not have a Fortune 500 company in Canada. They wouldn't even make the S&P 500.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So the real problem is, what have we done to get to this point? It's not that we haven't been trying to innovate, and every time that we come up with a good idea it gets bought out. That is true. But what we haven't done is start fostering businesses inside of Canada that have existed and then gone down. Something like BlackBerry. It existed for some time. It was all roses and butterflies. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, it didn't. Everybody threw their... That was an exaggeration, guys. It was... Trust me, it was not 3 days. But
Yes. Yeah.
3 days later, it didn't. And the BlackBerry stock goes kaput.
Yeah.
So the BlackBerry stock goes down to nothing. Because they weren't able to compete with these tech stocks. Why were they not able to compete with their tech stocks? We didn't have the infrastructure to be able to put our strongest minds and allowing them to be able to compete with the tech stock. We didn't have the BAs brokering deals to be able to manufacture this for as cheap as possible. The real problem with a lot of our political parties is that we don't nurture infrastructure enough. A lot of it's going to what we believe is best for Canada and just fundamentally abandoning infrastructure. Not in a sense that there's no infrastructure. Like, we have roads, we have abilities to do things. It's just the costs of utilizing these roads is climbing as gas increases, and we just hit another gas hike, and good April Fools, your gas is 7 cents more expensive. Like, great. But in terms of taxes, they're taxing things and then creating social programs without taxing things and creating infrastructure. If you can tax things and create infrastructure so that people can increase their buying power by having costs of living come down, you always expand your markets, because your costs of operating in business also come down as the costs of living come down. Which means you're depreciating business, not depreciating, you're like trimming business profits because it's all being put as expenses, and that's going to allow people to not be able to pay employees as much or to be able to maximize what they get out of themselves, because we're in this endless circle of we haven't been provided with the correct opportunity to move forward. It goes in a circle repeatedly.
Right, so that's kind of like, if I might interject, this is kind of like our current housing system, where for the longest time they didn't build on that infrastructure, and then eventually when there was a huge demand for it, the prices shot up since our supplies are so low. So since the governments haven't worked on infrastructure, that became more expensive, and I take it that it would be similar across the board, where if you don't work on building buildings, improving your roads, improving your train systems, things start to become more expensive. Is that correct?
They do, and the housing market is a great thing to talk about in Canada. Because what has happened is we had a bunch of people that said, okay, let's start investing in the housing market. By the way, part of my $100 million plan is just changing legislation that only allows specific government entities to own housing markets so that we can dilute ourselves and restrict ourselves and be able to control the housing market adequately. Because right now it's a joke. You go out there, you're like, this house should be 200,000. It's 7, right? Like, you want to buy something that's got 1,000 square feet, you're looking at a $500,000 purchase. It's just not. There's a reason why people aren't buying in Canada. But the thing is that because they spent so much money building up that infrastructure to then allow this home to exist, it costs the builder that much. So if they sold it for anything less, they're losing money. Obviously, they're going to stop building houses if they're losing money.
Right, and I remember you told me that a big problem for these housing developers is the cost of supplies.
Right. Now, the cost of supplies, it's all going to come back to infrastructure. Infrastructure is everything. Because if we had cheap supplies and you could just say, okay, now that we've built the infrastructure, this house is just going to go up because all it's going to take is labor and $100,000 worth of supplies. There's no way it's going to cost $500,000 to make. Right? Because things like wood would be subsidized. Or it doesn't even need to be subsidized. It just needs to be filling the requirement of it so that we're not entirely constricting ourselves. But what is very important is to consider that all of the companies that we do have that exist now have to operate on miniature margins, tiny margins, because energy costs a lot, because telecom costs a lot, because insurance costs a lot. And then you have things like, we don't even have our own banking system that can approve cards. Every time somebody is owning a business and you have a machine that accepts a card, we have to use an American company, and you, as the business owner, are paying 2% every time. You're getting ripped off 2%. And then people wonder why businesses don't succeed in Canada. These are the fundamental reasons as to why we don't succeed. It's all a piece of our infrastructure. It's all a part of, we have not been developing it enough to push our society forward. Because all of these things combined have led to this housing problem, we've run into the issue that it is no longer profitable to build houses. So, I mean, if it's no longer profitable to build houses, the builders are just going to stop doing it. They're going to be like, yeah, we're done. The housing market might come down a little bit, but it's not going to come down all that much because the builders are not going to dilute it anymore. So the real solution, it's to make how we acquire houses cheaper by saying we're going to implement less taxes is part of it. Now, less taxes in things like land development and being able to grow that aspect. In terms of things like woods, like supplies, all we need to do to make more houses is to say, hey guys, residential only, we're going to have a subsidy on wood. Right? Now, this is not within the $100 million plan, but this is things that we could brainstorm on how we fix Canada. Now, there's going to be a lot of feedback about how we fix Canada doing it this way because there's going to be a lot of trees that are going to be needed to cut down. And a lot of people are going to say, the habitats for animals, and they're not wrong. I understand that that is a concern. But it's a temporary measure designed to house the people that exist here. Right? We may need to increase our production of wood temporarily. Think about a 5-year plan to say, okay, we're increasing it for 5 years and then we're going to slow it back down again. Right? There's also the argument of how wood in of itself is going to produce less carbon dioxide than a patch of grass. Which...
Sorry, I think you mean it would absorb less carbon dioxide.
Yes, it would absorb less carbon dioxide than a patch of grass of the same... You can look that up, of the same... If you put a square foot, or a square mile, or square kilometer of grass and a square kilometer or mile of forest, the grass will actually absorb more out of the air, which kind of fixes our environmental problems in some sense. Now, it's an argument. It's not one I'm going to stick to because, like I said, there's other environmental problems that come with it that we need to consider. Right? Like all these animals losing their habitats. Is it worth it? I believe that we can make it so that it doesn't need to... Like, we could push for small amounts of time and then try and reduce our reliance on it in the future. I'm going to start talking about now a little bit more legislation about how we actually create lab-grown meat. It's a possibility, which would reduce our methane. But really what we should be talking about is vertical farming and how it's illegal in Canada. Vertical farming every country that has used it has made food so much cheaper that people have buying power again because it's the most efficient way of doing it. If you don't need any input of person, any labor input to produce food to feed the masses, yes, there's less labor required. But that labor no longer needs, we don't need as much labor to produce the adequate food. We rely less on labor. So what that means is that the places that actually require labor will get labor again. Right? You're just moving inefficient tactics out of Canada slowly. Things like vertical farming, things like, there's a couple of them, but another example of an inefficient tactic is our meat. When does that become vertical? Because what we could be doing is creating vertical meat farms, and there are people that are against meat, and I'm not going to ever go on to somebody's opinion about we shouldn't eat animals. They have the right to every opinion that they own. But what I'm going to say is we contribute to so much of our of our carbon dioxide problem because of the methane that is produced by these animals. It's not carbon dioxide, but it's greenhouse gases. It works into the same
emissions.
Yeah,
I get what you mean.
works into the same problem.
Yeah,
and what's crazy about methane is that it's actually really easily filtered out of the air. Right? You start stacking them in buildings that are 50 stories high and just putting cows to live in a building. Now, these cows can live in a building where that filtration system is taking the methane out of the air, and we can then use that methane to then produce energy. And it's all done autonomously, which is the overall goal. In my opinion, infrastructure is the most important now as it's ever been. And I'm going to get into that is because we are becoming more and more reliant on energy. And as the Canadian grid's kind of iffy, we don't have, we're operating at around 98% energy of what the grid can supply. And it needs serious investment. We don't even own it. So that affects our dollar because all of the assets that Canada owns, it doesn't. Like, we just own chunks of private businesses. We can't even say that we own our power. And yet, the power that exists has people invested in it, and they make profit off of it. When energy, it can be grown so much so into figuring out how to provide opportunity for everybody just by having an abundance of energy. Just by saying, okay, our manufacturing industry can grow by a certain amount because our energy would be free to manufacturing in Canada, so as long as it's providing to Canadians at a specific markup. Now, I believe that markup should be around 2%. So if you can produce something for $1, you could sell it for $1.02. Okay?
Okay.
Now, people are going to say, well, that's not very profitable. It is when you sell it to everybody. But I also believe in doubling down on the best ways. We are going to say, well, we don't want people to have monopolies. They're just going to raise their prices. Well, then they don't have access to free energy. Goodbye. Adios. Get lost. Right? If we had the infrastructure to be able to trade with our businesses, we were able to make the rules of what they're allowed to do. But instead, the businesses have all this leverage because they provide the jobs and we provide them with very little services in return. So, in terms of what's very, very important on how we fix infrastructure down the road, I believe we do need to invest in rebuying Hydro One. And I believe we need to invest in establishing a better grid to store our earned energy. And if we could do that, hypothetically increasing our dollar in the meantime.
Okay.
Okay? So our earned energy would be like you would take energy and run it through some water, right? I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's doable. Something that's a doable tactic. Separate oxygen and hydrogen, right?
Right. Electrolysis, right?
Yes. And the objective is to keep and nurture the hydrogen. All right, we're going to store it. Because hydrogen is, as a lot of people know, is one of the best things to produce power. It's a very strong element. It's rather explosive, but I'm sure there's solutions to it. I haven't really looked into it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's also batteries that can run on hydrogen. And all of these things that we just don't do because we were so concerned about selling it and getting that profit to our shareholders that own our Hydro One plant. But if we, rather than sold all of our excess energy, we started storing it, we could actually grow the value of the Canadian dollar again. We have an asset to say is valued. It is owned by our Canadian government. So if our government starts to go under, has something to sell to the world to say, well, we're not bankrupt entirely. We got these assets.
Yeah.
Right? It builds trust in your dollar, and that's what drives things to go up and down. There's many different other factors in why dollars have go up and down, such as inflation and deflation. When your economy is going through a very significant inflation, usually what happens is your value of your dollar collapses, right? And in terms of the domestic scope, think about it as it's the same amount of wealth across far more money. So the value of it, the wealth was here, and now it's here. It's gone down significantly to the rest of the world, right? Now what we need to start doing is tying our money to assets again. Doesn't have to be gold. I believe in an asset class that is mainly derived to push up the value of our dollar and decrease inflation.
Okay.
Now, if I was in charge of... I'm not in charge, okay? I don't even want to be in charge. But my ideas and ideologies on how we fix those problems is to involve things like the Bank of Canada and give them access to certain funds to be able to deflate our economy. So that now we can have a lower interest rate, things like 3% rather than 5 to 6%, and be able to sustain ourselves without hitting the 6% mark, be able to go for and target that 2% over long-term periods of time. I also believe that our Bank of Canada needs to start taking into consideration our 15-year outlook on 2% being the overall dollar. I think in 15 years it needs to go up by 2% every year, which would mean it would go up by 30. Now, that would mean it's going to look 15 years into the past and try and average it. So if you have a 6% year last year, you better not be trying to go for 2% again because your average is going to be crap. Right? You want to go for 0 for a couple of years to try and stabilize it and let society catch up to you.
Okay.
Right? The banks make a lot of money, and they make so much money off inflation. A lot of the time, the banks are the ones that are actually generating the money off of high inflation rates because they're loaning out money that isn't theirs. It's pretty much owned by our government, or it's just virtual, whatever you want to call it. But it's backed by our government because everything in Canada is CIDC insured. It's backed by our government, and then, not everything, but a majority of the loans that we can give out are backed by our government, and then as we make interest on it, the banks are making a ton of the money loaning it out to people, and it's money that doesn't exist. So when you can issue tons and tons and tons and tons of loans, the inflation is going to go like crazy. That's why when the interest rates go up, inflation tends to go down. If you didn't know that, but it's very, very important that we see things like this, and we say, well, we need to have a 15-year outlook. Our banks cannot be making that much money. If we had 6% inflation last year, we need to be targeting 0. We need to be saying, okay, we have to try and be on pace for the 15-year outlook. I would say 15 years back to 15 years in the future. You would want to try and get the overall number down to 2%, because that is the healthy number that we have established. The Bank of Canada has established is the goal.
Right.
Right? But we don't hold the Bank of Canada accountable for when it doesn't do what it wants to. If it achieves 6.9%, and then they target 2% again, it's that's just taking money away from our people. Right? You're stripping it from them. Because now going and living costs you far more, just because all of your expenses have gone up. Your wage increases usually don't outpace inflation, especially if it's at 2%. Especially if it's at 6%, which we've had pretty consistently over the past 3 years, which just hit my head against the wall. It's been a mess. But also a very large contributor as to why our housing market is so abysmal. It's because the cost of buying all these things has gone up. And it's not just the cost of buying all these things gone up, because the cost to make the products really didn't go up all that much. But the cost to get it to you has gone up significantly. Right? All the things in transporting goods from one side to another has just tripled. Because taxes on things like that have a play on it. But it's also, we haven't been developing in the infrastructure to make it cheaper. We're relying on inefficient methods and then complaining about the society being inefficient. We don't forward change enough. It's all about that infrastructure, about pushing companies saying, look, a lot of farmers may get hurt by vertical farming. And I'm well aware that there's going to be protests all over of people saying farmers are going to get hurt by vertical farming. You know what I'm going to say to those farmers? Put a bunch of solar panels on your property. Put a bunch of windmills up. Because you're still a farm, you're just farming something else. Now you're farming energy so that we can do things more efficiently. Right? They still have access to tons of land. There still needs to be opportunity for farmers to convert their land into something else that's profitable, so that we're not taking away their livelihoods. But it's very important that people understand that we're not saying we want farmers to go broke. We're saying that we don't want farmers to continually rip us off forever when there's more efficient ways of providing a service. It's all about figuring out plans on how we can weed them off of saying the inefficient methods need to be shut down so we can create a model where everything is given to us the most efficiently, so that it's the most cost effective, so that we can develop our infrastructure is based on cost effectiveness, right? If things are cost effective, that means you have good infrastructure. Because if you're a business and you have expenses of $100 a month, what are the odds you're going to make money?
That's a tough one to say.
Well, it's a tough one to say, but as opposed to $2,000 a month, the chances of making money are significantly higher. Okay? Right? Where, okay, he's now allowed to use his personal cell phone as business. Why not? The whole concept of having these business phones is ridiculous, because they pay more money to have business lines. If that's going to be the case, they should have access to the analytics that are going to be implemented with something like guilds. Okay, well now it costs a little bit more money to pay for your business line, but you'll have something like guilds where you'll be able to see analytics on a broader scale, not so that we could directly look at all of our competitors' information, but we can do it in an encrypted way where it still shows the statistics, but over a very broad scale, and nothing is really public. And it's all generated through the guild system that provides everybody with the opportunity to be able to understand all of our markets. Another thing that we don't do is look at solutions in other countries and why the solutions work and don't work. Now, this concept of creating opportunity is all about building on all broad perspectives. Like, my vision for Canada includes a 4-day work week, which would drive so many people to a food bank at this particular moment in time is not feasible. If we could have it where people all got the increase in pay and then had a 4-day work week, that would be great. But half of our businesses were shut down because they've been longing for this cheap labor for so long that they've been lacking the innovation. They've been using the labor force that has been implemented and had tons of immigrants to shut down a lot of our lower end labor inputs, to make our outputs not need to really go up that much. You just needed more input, which is not effective in terms of long-term scalability. It's not efficient. We need to be pushing for a more efficient Canada, a more accountable Canada, and a more united Canada. Now, the last topic I'm going to talk about is unity. Unity is all about creating an environment where we all want to be together. Now, that's very difficult to do because there's tons of things that we could all be doing. There's tons of activities on the earth that exist, and to be able to push people in a certain direction is actually rather challenging. But communities, I believe, need to start focusing on building unity through involving people in things like sports, and things that they can be proud of in their city. Things like sports. Say our CHL teams started offering free beer and free vape pens to go enjoy the game. And I'm not going to say maybe a vape pen's not free, but you know,
it's included with their tickets.
It's included with their tickets. So when you go there, you can have a good time. There's still a designated kids section, but you could go there, have a good time, come together as a community, and enjoy the fact that together we're going to succeed. We can say our CHL needs to then increase its visibility. These kids that are on the CHL teams need to do more volunteering, need to do more giving back. And it all contributes into creating a better and stronger, if your community owns your team in your city. Take like a very small team. Let's talk about the London Knights. Now, the London Knights are owned by a very well-off hockey guy. I believe his name is... I don't know his name, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But London Knights are a very well-off hockey franchise because they operate in a school community. Now, this school community just fills their seats up because they offer that level of unity. They have all these people who want to be together. It's really easy for them to fill their seats because they have people that are all working at the same thing. All these people feel connected to one another, not like it can be because they're of the correct age to go enjoy a sport, but they also have disposable incomes. You know, they're living on student debt. They're a little bit more frivolous. They don't have that 9-to-5 job where they're wanting to hit their head against the wall. Their spending's a little bit more. They're also more likely to drink, more likely to want to be the guys to party. And it's built off of that. The atmosphere is built off of that. And the community has actually grown because of the London Knights has been huge for London. Now, if towns actually purchased their professional hockey teams, I would want to implement it on a very small scale and test it to see if we could say the communal growth of one franchise to another. Say you're advertising that you're giving a lot of your profits back to your city's infrastructure. What is that going to mean for your city? How many more people are going to want to support you because you're using your profits to give it back to the infrastructure, which helps make living less expensive?
A lot of people would
right?
Contribute to that, yeah.
It's a circulatory practice that is underutilized in Canada. It's developing and aligning everybody's common goals with the common good. That it's creating these circles of how money flows through the system and creates a perfect circular system. It's how we forward Canada. Well, if you want to buy our new tech product that's might be a little bit more than Apple, but we're still going to produce it and subsidize it so that Canadians can own it because it's good for Canada for you to use that money to purchase something. It's not then going far and getting farmed out to all of these other countries for you to get the tech that you require to live your day-to-day life. It goes back into our economy and it circulates. And that is the fundamental principle of what infrastructure is everything. It's infrastructure and it's circulatory practices. When we learn how to master those two things, opportunity grows like crazy. And I believe that there is always hope for Canada. I believe that Canada is very, very close to having everything we need if we just leaned into change. Rather than leaned into being stuck in our ways. Because there's too many people that are against too many things. Innovation is got to be the driving force in what pushes an economy forward. It cannot be the old way. Right? The old way eventually dies. Doesn't matter how good it is, eventually it'll die. There's a more efficient way. Because we're always learning. We're always adapting as humans. And eventually we find more efficient ways. And if we just continue doing it the old way, we're just hitting our head against a wall. It's really not beneficial.
No.
It doesn't create a better society. It's holding us back. It's creating actually an oppressed nation to contribute to a way that, although we might deem to be the way it is now, and we want to protect the people that grow our food, we're not protecting the people that buy the food.
I'm going to leave it there for now, and thank Alfonso for allowing me to articulate the Opportunity Party's vision for Canada. Please reach out to me if you have anything to discuss, ideas, perspectives, or ideologies. Thanks for tuning in. More political brainstorming will be coming your way next Friday with a new guest and a new topic. Looking forward to building my perspective with you.